Avoiding conflict, or avoidant behaviors, as I call them, is the number one thing that destroys relationships. And it's because it leads to resentment, it leads to contempt, and all of this creates distance and the disconnection. And it's that disconnection that is what most relationships end over. Attachment is the biological imperative to bond to other safe, reliable loved ones. We used to think we only needed this in childhood, but science has proven otherwise, that even as adults, we know from the Harvard study on adult development that close quality relationships are the number one predictor of longevity.
Welcome to Cake for Dinner. This is not your everyday mom podcast. We laugh, we curse, we tell the truth, and we're here to ditch the perfection culture. Colette Fehr, welcome to Cake for Dinner.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So before we get started, because I really want to launch into your book, and I think before we really do that, if you could just introduce yourself,
Sure.
kind of tell the audience what you do, who you are, and really why you wrote the book.
Okay, I would love to. Thank you for the opportunity. So I am a therapist. I'm a couples therapist. I also work with individuals. But even my career is very much born of my life experience. I grew up with kind of an idyllic childhood, genuinely, where I was very close to my parents and we were like a little threesome. And then my parents got divorced when I was in college. But in those years before they got divorced, there was a lot of arguing, as there are in most households when divorce happens. It was very unsettling for me. And it was very much something I lay in bed at night thinking about as I prayed for them to stop fighting, that one day I would have the perfect marriage. And I felt like I played a little bit of the family therapist role, even with my parents. So many of us start our careers young when we're not choosing them. And fast forward many years ahead, I married somebody who I thought I could have the perfect marriage with no fighting whatsoever, a conflict avoidant person, which very much leads to my book. And I ended up divorced at 31 years old when my kids were 1 and 3. And I found myself with no money, no support, really having to start over from the bottom of the barrel. And I wanted to become a therapist because of this journey, what I saw my parents go through and what I experienced in my own marriage. I wanted to be able to help people who really wanted their relationship to make it good and connected. So the book is very much born of that I was hearing women in my office for therapy saying the same things I once said in my first marriage. I wish I hadn't lost my voice. I wish I had spoken up sooner. And blaming their partners, which is exactly what I thought, for why they couldn't communicate.
Right.
And not realizing that there was an answer. So this book is about giving people an actionable formula for how to communicate effectively, to have that emotional intimacy we all long for.
Thanks for giving me that background. I feel like so many, especially therapists or people in the helping industry, a lot of their wisdom comes from, hard-earned wisdom, right? So
Absolutely.
In this book, you draw a lot, I suppose, from your first marriage and talking a lot of specifically about how avoiding conflict really is what destroys the relationship. So did that build in the relationship, or was that kind of present in the beginning as you look back?
It was definitely present in the beginning, in that part of what I was drawn to because of my difficult upbringing experience was somebody who avoided conflict, because I thought that was the answer. I thought if you're not fighting, you're not arguing, you have a great marriage. And we never fought about anything. But I didn't really realize that I was self-silencing, I was suppressing emotions, all of the things that I highlight in my book, The Cost of Quiet, because avoiding conflict or avoidant behaviors, as I call them, is the number one thing that destroys relationships. And it's because it leads to resentment, it leads to contempt, and all of this creates distance and the disconnection. And it's that disconnection that is what most relationships end over. People tend to assume that couples are in my office fighting about finances, parenting struggles, infidelity. And it's not that those things don't happen or they're not important, but those things don't tend to end relationships. What does is distance and disconnection that comes from not knowing how to handle conflict constructively.
And what does that look like early on? So, because you're basically saying that in the beginning, you thought this was the answer. It was a great relationship. There was no conflict. When did you start to notice that it was a problem? And what are some of the signs that somebody could, look for, identify?
Yeah. I mean, I think truthfully, if we ask ourselves, we know we're avoiding conflict.
Sure.
People will tell me all the time, oh, I don't like conflict. What's interesting is I'd hear from all of these women who were extremely emotionally intelligent, communicative. They're not quiet, right? Quiet is a euphemism for conflict avoidance in the title of my book. I'm certainly not quiet. I have a very assertive personality. But something different tends to happen when we're in a romantic relationship. And it's because this is our most important attachment bond and we're wired for connection. So bringing up something that could rock the boat, upset our partner, create distance, push them away. We're also conditioned by society as women still to be selfless, that's noble.
Right.
That's still out there. So all of this feeds into the fact that a little thing happens, it hurts our feelings, it irritates us, and we think, oh, it's not worth bringing up, or it'll only lead to an argument. It never goes well. I'll just get over it if I let it sit. So I think most of us know on some level that we're avoiding, but we think it's the better choice. We think mistakenly that we're protecting our relationships by letting things go. So what tends to happen is that they build up and they accumulate and they either turn into what I talk about as victim volcano syndrome in my book, where, you take it and you take it and you take it, and then one day you just blow, and then everyone's angry at you about your reaction, and the whole legitimate grievance you had in the first place is completely lost. Or we keep swallowing and we keep stuffing, and there's an implosion internally. And this is scientifically linked to not only mental health problems like depression and anxiety, but also legitimate disease and illness, autoimmune disorder, cardiovascular disease, irritable bowel syndrome, even cancer. So this stuff can literally kill you. Now, I think in terms of the drift and signs of the drift in a relationship is, you're not supposed to be fighting like cats and dogs or arguing like I heard my parents do. Back in the 80s, nobody was writing or talking about how to divorce well like we are today. And my parents are wonderful people. They didn't know better. But if you're not ever having differences or coming to the table saying, hey, the hard conversations, this really hurt my feelings and I want to tell you about it because being close to you is so important to me, right? It's taking the risk to be vulnerable when it's easier in the short term and more comfortable to let it go. But in the long term, it enriches your relationship.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I like that you say, for example, you're not a quiet person. I'm not a quiet person.
No, hell no.
But I like that you really talk about that, because the idea you would think would be that this would be sort of a quiet person that doesn't speak up for themselves. But oftentimes women who are bold in their world, bold in their jobs, bold maybe in other relationships, find themselves not being so bold in their primary relationship. And I find even in my own life that, especially as a mom of 3, that sometimes it feels easier to just avoid and to stay quiet about that one thing because you have a bigger job to do.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I would say most of these women are not quiet, meek persons. I mean, I think as a therapist, we tend to draw clientele that are not necessarily all my clients are like me, but that we really connect with.
Sure.
Most of the women in my office are really savvy. Many of them have huge careers, or, they're neuroscientists, they're CEOs, they're doctors, lawyers, or they're running huge households with tremendous responsibility at home. These are women who absolutely have a voice. but the romantic context is different.
Right. But I think it's not even about not being able to have a voice. I think it is that person that can handle so much and do so much that also can be dynamic in the quietness, right? So it's like you handle your job, you handle this. And like you said, there is this like idea that we're just supposed to take it, right? Yeah. And in order to, like, I remember once some kind of thing I was having with my husband in the very beginning, and my mom said, you know, your job is to be the mom. Your job is to take care of the entire house. So sometimes you're going to have to make decisions that impact everybody. Like you might have to do something you don't want to do to keep the entire house happy. You know, there is this idea that you're supposed to do it. Right. And I think powerful women, a lot of the women I interview on my podcast, wearing all the hats. Sometimes being quiet is like a skill almost that you feel not proud of, but you feel responsible for.
I think this is a big part of the problem. And it's not saying that there aren't things that you roll with and that we don't have to have a degree of acceptance.
Sure.
This is really about not abandoning yourself to keep the peace. So I think that advice that you got is very common, but it's really not good for us. Right. There is a way to take everybody else's needs into account, but also to be assertive and vulnerable for yourself in saying, hey, this is how this is impacting me. This piece is important to me. So I'm giving a very actionable process called self-connected communication in this book, where you're really, in simplified terms, you're connecting to yourself before you're communicating with anybody else. So you're not reacting off the cuff. You know, I give all these ways in the book that we avoid conflict. There's a top 10, and some of them are not quiet. Even bickering, that is not expressing yourself. Expressing yourself is honoring your inner world by very clearly, honestly, and vulnerably explaining how something impacts you, sharing your actual emotions, where what people tend to do instead is they give their interpretation, what I call the negative partner story, right? And it can feel really true in the moment. Like somebody, let's say your spouse expects you to do something that is too much for you with what you have on your plate that day. Or let's say you think they expect you to do something and all day you're feeling resentful. And I always carry the mental load. And let's face it, we do carry most of the mental load. But let's say that's the negative partner story that's running through your mind. And you haven't said to your husband in this example, you know, today I've got a lot on my plate. I'm feeling really stressed. I really need you to do X, Y, Z. The story in my mind is that you expect me to do it all. And speaking to the theme you just mentioned, as women, we often feel that is what we're, right? If we're a good mom, good wife, good CEO, we should be able to handle it all with aplomb.
You almost take pride in it a little bit.
Exactly.
You know, and it's almost this sort of the thing that keeps you going, right? Yes. Like, you know, I think I take pride in that sometimes.
Right. I think we all do. And it can come at a huge cost, at a tremendous expense to our essential self. Instead of tuning in and saying, okay, what am I feeling inside? Identifying our body sensations, that's information that points us to our needs and then putting those needs out there. And usually it might be some kind of behavior change, but usually we really need messages of reassurance and comfort to hear from our partner. Hey, you know what, in this case, either I wasn't actually expecting you to do all of that. I'm happy to help. Or, you know, I was kind of expecting, but now that I hear how you're feeling, I get it. And that makes sense to me. And I don't expect you to do it all. We need comfort. We need reassurance. And we need to give ourselves permission to articulate it because nobody is going to honor our needs if we don't voice them.
I also think we need to give our partner the opportunity to show up, right? Because if they don't know that we're struggling, right, they might have the idea because we do it so well or we make it look effortless. They might have the idea that we're happy doing it.
I think that's often the case.
Yes.
What I see in therapy is that 95% of the time when I help someone really communicate what they're feeling and needing clearly and vulnerably, it lands. They're shocked by their partner's response. In fact, I've even had feedback from advanced readers for my book that, wow, I tried the scripts and the methods in the book, and I can't believe how different my husband responded to me. It's really, we think we're communicating sometimes and we're not being that clear. Other times we're giving indirect hints and we know it. But part of it is we feel like it is noble to be self-sacrificing and do it all. And sometimes we don't say anything at all until we blow up. So I identify all of these behaviors with great specificity and really give tools for how to do it differently. But this is all rooted in attachment science. And I think we have to really understand how attachment science wires us to prioritize connection, because this is why it makes conflict so hard to address.
So give us a very digestible, easy to understand, quick view of the attachment style that you're talking about.
Yes. So attachment is the biological imperative to bond to other safe, reliable loved ones. We used to think we only needed this in childhood, but science has proven otherwise, that even as adults, we know from the Harvard study on adult development that close quality relationships are the #1 predictor of longevity.
Wow.
So we actually need people not just to survive, but also to thrive. So when it comes to romantic partnerships, that is our primary attachment figure in adulthood. Now, we need to accomplish a kind of a difficult bind, which is that we need to be a close connected we with that other person, but we still need to be a distinct, differentiated I and maintain our own identity. It's hard.
It's hard.
And then when you think about how important the relationship is to you, anything, if you don't know how to handle conflict constructively, then conflict feels like a threat to that most important attachment bond. And it's wired into our limbic system, which is our emotional nervous system. So when you talk about bringing something up and, oh, it just would be easier to let it go, of course, it feels like if you don't have a solid method in your bones, it feels like I'm going to just like rock the boat needlessly.
Right.
He or she is going to be mad at me. We're going to have a whole thing that goes nowhere when I could have just sucked it up and done it and I'd be over it tomorrow.
I think that's a little bit of the misconception, the whole thing that goes nowhere, right? I think people aren't necessarily confident about that.
Right.
And also, I would imagine when people come to you, they have a long history of being quiet. So what is like one or two, what are like tangible, easy things or an easy way for somebody to start?
Yeah. So, I mean, and again, everyone is definitely not quiet. And I don't think a lot of people would describe themselves that way. This is why it's really important to know that this is a euphemism for avoidant in the relationship.
Yes.
And some people are avoidant in all their relationships. But an easy place to start is with the connection to yourself and the self-awareness, is to ask yourself in a given moment when you notice even a little bit of activation. Let's say you've asked your partner 15 times to please do the dishes this day because you do need help. Say you put it out there and they haven't done the dishes and your blood is boiling and you immediately have a negative partner story. See, this is why I don't ask.
I feel like every woman on earth is like just tuned in.
Totally, right? Because we've all been there. I've been there too with my own husband, right? This is why I don't ask. It doesn't happen. It didn't happen.
Or it doesn't happen fast enough.
Yes, or didn't get done the way I would do it. Right, right. All these things. And so we're angry. So there's going to be an instinctive drive to either pop off and say something passive aggressive or snarky or say nothing at all and just kind of stew in silent resentment. The easy place to start would be to notice, wow, my body is activated, and then get curious and ask yourself, what am I feeling? The second question would be to ask yourself, okay, what am I needing or longing for in this moment?
Okay.
This is not, going through the whole relationship, Pandora's box of everything I've ever hated about you and all the ways you've disappointed me. in this moment. And in this case, it might be to hear an apology from your partner. You're right. I said I would do the dishes and I didn't. And an acknowledgement that this behavior will be different.
Mm-hmm.
It might also be that you need to hear some reassurance that I can understand, some validation. I can understand why you're frustrated. Right. And then in that case, you're going to ask for that. That's what's really important there. But you want to take the time to process internally first and get really clear about naming your emotion and being able to ask with specificity for what you need. We all know intellectually no one's a mind reader, but we forget that. And because vulnerability is so scary, we tend to not want to put ourselves out there. But one of the things I teach people is we really need to say, hey, I need you to acknowledge that you didn't follow through. And we're saying it kindly, but directly, that you didn't follow through with what I asked. I'd really like an apology. But more importantly, I need to know, this is the attachment piece, that like when I ask you stuff, that you're listening and that you care and that it's important to you. Because that's the painful part underneath that often goes unaddressed.
And I like how you said that I don't know how you phrase it, but that you kind of make up in your mind, because I think we decide what's happening, how somebody feels, why they said that.
Yep, the negative partner story.
Yes.
Yes.
And that can just build upon itself year after year after year. And
that's exactly what happens.
Yes.
The story becomes more and more entrenched. And in the moment, it feels like the truth when we're upset. But then over time, if these little things go unaddressed, the story calcifies.
Right.
It becomes entrenched and it just becomes the unequivocal truth, even though your partner may see it differently. People are shocked in therapy to hear often how much their partner really cares when they can get at that deeper layer. And this book is going to give you all of how to do this without having to go to therapy.
I love that. I do some couples coaching, and I'm equally as shocked as they are often to find out how much can change just from a few communication tools.
Yes.
Like communication in a relationship is the silent killer. I mean, it really is.
It's got to be good. And no one teaches us how to do these things. Plus, there is the piece that words are only, and communication are only 7% of the equation. So the actual words you say, yes, they matter, but your facial expression, your tone, your body language, that communicates much more than the actual words. So you've really got to be able to shift into, and this is why self-connected communication, my process, is about getting to that wise, loving adult self inside of you. That part of us can hold on to ourselves. We have clarity, and we're also able to be curious about our partner, and we're not unintentionally
it's not as reactive.
Right. We should not be communicating from reactivity at all. Okay. Now, I am a very reactive person. I'm Irish, Italian from New York City. Like, in my younger years, I mean, I threw stuff like that's my nature, if you will. So, and it's not that I've locked that part of me in the basement and, with duct tape over her mouth. It's that I've learned to embrace that part of me. It's great that I'm fiery and passionate, but also that I have a mature adult part of me who is the CEO of me. And should be making my decisions and doing my communication. So I have you in the book. This is metaphorical, of course, but dialoguing with these different parts of yourself so that when you come forward, you can honor your anger by communicating through your sage self to say, this made me very angry, and here's why, and here's what I need. Not screaming and yelling, not fighting to win. None of that stuff has any place in a mature relationship.
So all of that makes total sense to me. What about when the partner isn't responsive? So you've done this work, you've connected with yourself, you're delivering it in a way that's mature, you're saying what you need, and they are unresponsive. how do you guide someone then?
So this is a big thing because we can't guarantee that the other person is going to meet us there, even though much of the time when you're really genuinely clear and vulnerable, you'll be surprised by the response you get. But there's all kinds of other factors.
Sure.
Maybe there's trauma. The person hasn't done their own work. So first, the value of doing this is first and foremost for yourself. You feel completely differently inside of you. It builds your confidence. It's good for your mental health. And you feel empowered. So their failure to meet you and the response starts to land totally differently. We might feel hurt or disappointed that we put ourselves out there, but it doesn't have this awful punch that we think it's going to have or that it has when we haven't shored ourselves up. But I do give you a process for addressing that with the partner. And I'll just give you the simple idea is that you then take some time to process it and do the same thing where you're going inside and seeing how it lands, but communicate about that. You know, I've done a lot of work to try to come forward really vulnerably because I care so much about this relationship and to share with you that these things have hurt my feelings. And it feels like to me, every time I come forward and I'm taking great pains not to criticize you or blame you, just to share my inner world, I notice a reaction that lands for me like defensiveness. And it really hurts me and it makes me want to pull away. It makes me concerned that I won't be able to share these things with you and that distance is going to grow. Can we work on this together? And you're making an offer, basically,
Sure.
an invitation, and you're, again, doing self-connected communication. You're not blaming. You're just saying, this is what I see. This is what I experience. This is how it lands. And this is the effect this is having. It's pushing me away from you. Now, if you're doing this and you're taking care of your side of the street, and every time you're sticking with your principles, then you know you're doing your part. And if your partner can't or won't meet you there, then part of the empowerment is you have very real data. You have information with which you're empowered to make choices for you. Some people might say, okay, this is what my relation.
Some people.
Yeah.
Good. I have to wipe my nose.
I know it's making me realize, how do they do podcasts in New York? Like where I grew up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So some people might say, you know, this is the limit of in fact, I can think of a couple people I know even who have done this work. And they say, you know, I'm seeing the limitation. I've asked my partner if they'd be willing to go to therapy. They're not. I'm really sticking to these principles on my side of the street and nothing's changing. And I've got 4 kids and a great life. And I think I can live with it without abandoning myself. So I'm going to stay, but I'm going to realize that like, I'm just not going to get that emotional intimacy. Other people say, you know what? Life is short and I don't want to live without that intimacy. I want to be known. I want to be close. And I think I might leave.
But either way, you have clarity, right? And you have
Yes.
something firm to base it on.
Yeah, you have confidence and clarity about your decisions.
Yes, for sure.
And most importantly, you don't get sick. You know, you don't get sick and you're not anxious and depressed and shut down and living in what I call the cave of resentment. Resentment is the number one sign that you have not advocated for yourself.
And not a great way to live.
No.
Like, just not a great strategy.
No.
And I think once you've had, I'm on my second marriage also. And I think once you've, you know, had a moment with a real, true, connected friendship, then you really know what that means.
Yes.
But I think oftentimes prior to having that, people accept less than they
You're so
want.
right.
They don't really know what they're missing, you know, and they've, like you, seen it in their childhood. It hasn't looked great, right?
Right. Yeah, I thought conflict was all destructive arguing.
Yes.
Conflict doesn't mean all these conversations are comfortable or easy. That's why I call them hard conversations. But it's 2 mature adults who are willing to self-disclose, to honor their inner experience. And when you do that and you work through those things, you feel close to your partner in a way that is indescribable until you have it. This is where it also becomes self-reinforcing. Because if you use this actionable method and you get a good response from your partner, it makes you naturally want to do it more, and it's not so hard.
And it's easier as you go forward. Just like anything, getting in shape or any big change, it is, I think, difficult and scary maybe in the beginning, but I think gets easier. And one thing I wanted to make sure I didn't miss, this concept has helped me not just in my marriage, but also I think when you get good at this level of communicating, it helps you in all of your relationships.
I agree.
One of the things that I had a really hard time was with my teenage son, and just completely avoiding hard conversations because I thought they would be too much for him, because they were too much for me. And as a result, he grew up with the inability to navigate emotions. And in this past year, we've had to really face off with some tough stuff. But I have really pushed myself to have hard conversations, and I can't even tell you how hard they've been. But they're getting easier, and he is growing so much. I've heard someone say once, don't rob someone of the opportunity they deserve to grow. You know, sometimes by being quiet, we rob people of the opportunity to grow. And we rob ourselves.
Yeah, and we're not in control of other people's experience, but we don't know what can happen if we don't take the risk. And you're absolutely right. It definitely gets easier. Plus, the studies show that we anticipate, we fear these moments so intently. And even if the conversation's hard, they're not as scary in actuality. The anticipation is worse than the thing. Every time, and I do this all day, every day for 14 years now, every time I have someone do what we call in therapy an enactment, they always turn to me. They sometimes say, oh, that was a little scary. They always say, I feel so much better. So I want to get this message out for all of you guys listening too, that we are also biologically wired to speak our truth. And it feels good in your body when you do that, because that's what we're designed for.
And I think the suppression, although it seems like maybe easier in the moment, once you get away from it in retrospect, the suppression feels awful.
It is. And
it's
what
almost
makes
like
sick.
a constant hum.
You
know, you never quite feel good about it. And I think for those of us who are have been married before unsuccessfully, you know what that constant.
Oh, yeah. I lived it in my first marriage.
Me too.
Yeah.
And so I love this book. I love that you wrote it. I think it's going to help so many couples, so many women.
Thank you.
And if people wanted to find you, wanted to read the book, how do they go about that?
Yes. So The Cost of Quiet, How to Have the Hard Conversations That Create Secure, Lasting Love is available everywhere you get books, and also on my website, ColetteJaneFehr.com. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok at Colette Jane Fehr. And I write a Substack every week where I give tons of great free information about relationships and communication called Secrets of a Therapist. So please find me and feel free to reach out if you have questions about the book or anything else. I love engaging with people.
Amazing. I will also be writing about this particular interview on my Substack. And if you are not following Cake for Dinner, please do so and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.